A 7 point.
Oh, 7 point.
Yeah.
That's because you're looking at it.
Yeah, but let's see.
The next 5 years, I have a little presentation to start out with. The council is going to tell us the rules of the hearing. And that is the reason for the hearing. Folks to share with us if they haven't already, and share with us if they have already. Your thoughts and concerns about the proposed legislation. The reason we have a public hearing is that in part of New York State, part of the lawmaking process requires us to. Our original plan when we formed the committee was to do this in August. And we have to get approval from all on our word before we can go to public hearing, and that approval when we thought it would. And so here we are tonight, getting it done. Having said that, I'm going to turn it over to Dave to start the presentation.
Awesome, great, Mr. Chairman. Justin, can you grab that?
Yep.
Over there. And you remember that you want to move on the side there? Yeah, just wait there. How's your way? Yes, you can start. Good afternoon, everyone. I'll apologize for 2 things off the bat. I'm getting over a cold, so I apologize. I'm a little thick. If you can't hear me, just tell me to speak up. And Justin's monitoring our Zoom participants without saying we'll fine. Secondarily, how many people in the room have seen this presentation? It's been several times now. We did it on August 4th. I did it at Warren County Soil and Water. We did it once in advance. If you see it, I apologize. We have a few new slides. Thank you, sir. Here? Okay, I'll try to be a little bit louder. We'll get it going as we go. Just not as good as I usually am. Anyway, so here we are, Lake George. We're going to be talking about septic systems around Lake George, inspections and new standards. We've been talking about this now since June of 2021. We've had a robust body of people that have been involved. Several of you are in the room today, and we thank you for your time on that. We did a public informational meeting, which was essentially this presentation, and that was on August 4th. Zoom, I think we had 150 people on that call, which is very helpful. But we're going to go through very similar things, and then the important part about today is your thoughts, right? We're looking for your comments, your questions, your feedback to where we are right now. So we're going to get jumping right into it. We're going to hold questions and comments to the end. We're going to do the people in the room first, and then Justin is going to follow up for anybody online. So with that, we'll give it a go. So maybe not everybody knows exactly what the Lake George Park Commission is. The Park Commission actually started out as a non-New York State agency. It was just a commission, essentially a shell organization that had a marine patrol starting in 1961, but the legislature established Lake George Park in 1961, meets and bounds, with the idea that they not only wanted to protect Lake George, but to provide public safety for the users. And in 1987, the legislature came together and said, you know what? We're facing kind of some unprecedented challenges in Lake George. That was after the 1983 National Urban Runoff Program study came out, which was kind of a shot heard around the Lake George region. There was 2 lakes in New York State that were in the National Urban Runoff Program. One was in Aronicola Bay, out in Rochester. The other site in New York State was Lake George. The whole purpose of those studies was to identify, is stormwater really impacting our water bodies nationwide? Because this was just kind of coming out of the scene. Non-point source pollution was the next thing after point source pollution, right? Everybody remembers in the 70s, all the industrial outfalls going into our rivers and waterways. The EPA largest outfall that with the states. The next thing was non-point source. How do we address protecting our lakes from less diffuse sources? And what they figured out is, yes, stormwater runoff was a pretty big issue for Lake George. And so they created the Park Commission, and they gave it broad powers and authorities, working with New York State and other sister agencies and local municipalities to try to do better. Let's see if we can put in place some groundbreaking projects and programs to protect Lake George for the future. Lake George is one of the clearest large lakes in the world. So our water quality is second and third only to Crater Lake and Tahoe Lakes in terms of lakes this size, in really in the Northeast, if not the whole country. So that is the Lake George Park. The Park Commission is overseen by a 10-member board of commissioners. And then there's a staff that they oversee, myself and Joe and Justin and a number of other folks. And we interact regularly with our communities, with our nonprofits, with our municipalities. The whole goal of working together to try to do better for Lake George within a reasonable set of expectations, not regulatory overreach. Everything that we do is transparent and open. We try as best we can as a small 9-person New York State agency plus a 13-member Marine Patrol to get the word out as much as possible. We're happy with the turnout here. We're happy with the 30, 40 people online. And the public comment period is still going to be open to November 30th. If you have any follow-up questions from today, call me, email me, and we can talk about it as long as you want. So we're going to get into it and talk about septic systems a little bit. So this is what we're looking at. So for those of you that aren't well versed in septic systems, you have your standard house right here or business. Your discharge line, when you flush the toilet or you run a shower, it's going to come into your septic tank. Primary purpose of a septic tank is it's going to catch all the solids and only clean water or relatively clean water is coming out to your distribution box. Distribution box is essentially a concrete box about this big that's got outlet ports in it that go into your leach lines. Your leaching field right here, and the purpose of your leach field is to take that water and infiltrate it into the ground where the soil does 99% of the work to remove the bacteria, the phosphates, the nitrates, all those bad things that we don't want. And in a relatively small area under the leach field, you need to only have 2 feet by New York State standards. That material, that pollution can be cleaned up and addressed by the soils, and then cleaner water goes to the groundwater and then out to the next water source. So if we don't have these things working and functioning properly, if they haven't been maintained, this is the type of thing that we can see, in which or more along near shores of Lake George. And if you guys have been paying attention to the media at all, you know that we're having harmful algae blooms in Lake George. They're still very small and none of them have had any kind of toxicity to them, but it's really kind of concerning. And we're seeing these more and more throughout New York State and the Northeast. We're trying to get ahead of that as best we can by addressing as many pollution sources as possible. And septic systems are something that we really need to take a look at. Hence our 1.5 years worth of work on this to move the project forward. So this I actually started out my professional career as a septic inspector. It was fascinating. Worked in the Wastewater watershed, going farm to farm and looking at situations just like this. If you see this in your yard, high likelihood that you're having problems with your septic system. You're going to want to contact somebody to take a look at it. So here's the key, right? Improperly designed and improperly maintained are 3 parts of your septic, right? Has to have good design, has to have good construction, and like a car, you need to maintain it. You can't just set it and forget it. And I was in 20 years of Warren County Soil and Water Conservation. We ran a lot of septic programs around the county. Voluntary cost share base will come out to your house, look at your septic, and see if we can find some money to clean out your tank. And invariably, number one, a lot of people didn't know where their systems worked, didn't even know what a septic system was. And when we got out there to pump it out, it's actually completely full and their system had failed. So we're hoping there's more awareness now than we did out 20 years ago, but we're still seeing systems like this throughout the park. So regulatory authority, the commission, again, established by the New York State Legislature, they wrote this into law back in 1987. In consultation with DEC, Department of Health, and each municipality within the park, the commission shall adopt rules and regulations for the discharge of wastewater to ensure optimum protection. So that's 43.112. And also study, monitor, and inspect for pollution from any source within the park. Right. So we have an obligation to address wastewater, and we have an obligation and authority to inspect for those systems. So we have gone through this language and regulation for over a year with the attorneys at DEC, the governor's office, and Department of Health, just to make sure what we're working on and what we're looking at, this commission has the authority to do so. Every single one of those entities, those regulatory authorities and those council have signed off and said you clearly have the authority to do this. And not only do we have the authority, we actually have a requirement to do so. So what are the first steps? How did we get this whole thing started? We finished up, you may recall, with stream corridors and stormwater a couple of years ago, And our chairman, our past chairman, Bruce Young said, you know, we have a process. We can't handle multiple sets of regulations at a time, but we know everything is important. And once we get done getting those programs in place and making sure that they work, then we're going to start the process. We're not jumping into anything and saying, this is what we're going to do. We're going to start from point zero, learn everything that we can, and then we're going to react appropriately. And so to do so, the first step was putting together a whole pile of people that know a lot about septic systems, designs, and everything to do with management of these types of systems. We have Tom Snow, one of the top people in BBC that runs the New York City Watershed Septic Program. Kevin Kenyon is our local engineer from the Department of Health. Dan Baruch from the town of Lake George. Sam Hall, Chairman of Washington County Board of Supervisors. So we have an array of people from business owners to engineers to regulators to code enforcement people that actually are on the ground doing this type of stuff. And we have 5 of our commissioners. We can't have more than 5 in any committee because that becomes a forum. So 5 of our commissioners stepped up and met monthly to talk about this topic and said, how do we get from where we are right now to better understanding what the needs are of Lake George, and then should we do something after that? So this committee met monthly, first Thursday of every month, 2 p.m. via Zoom, always open to the public. It was always announced in the papers. And we have several people come online and listen in. Of course, this is partially during COVID. So we had attendees come in, listen, ask questions, and we'd answer those real time. The nice thing about working with a small agency is we are highly responsive. You send me an email, you're going to get a response most often within a half an hour. If I'm out of town, I'll get back to you as soon as I can. So to start the process, the committee said, we need to figure out 3 things, right? Literature review. What do we know about septic systems that impact the water rights? There is a body of scientific literature out there. The choice is, do we start to create our own science over a series of 5 to 10 years and recreate the wheel, or do we take a look and say, what has been established for the science on this topic, really throughout largely the Northeast, because that's kind of the climate regime that we're living within. And so we figured, let's hire an outside consultant to do this because we're working on a pile of other stuff. So we're fortunate enough to hire Sean Doty and Chris Brown from Chazen, who spent a considerable amount of time doing exactly that. They kind of excel in that type of work. And what they did is put a package together that was presented to our board when we went through. So that was number 1. Number 2, other programs. We're not recreating the wheel here. We are not breaking new ground in Lake George. If we put this program in place where at least the 14th or the 15th lake in New York State that has done this, and that doesn't count the whole New York City watershed that does this on a regular basis. So in doing so, we had the ability to reach out to every single one of those program managers and said, how did you start? Why did you start? How was your program administered? What are the challenges that you faced? We talked to every single one. We have a whole spreadsheet and database of all what went well, what didn't go well, so the pitfalls and pratfalls of those programs we're able to learn right up front. Then lastly, what's in our own backyard? Let's take a look at the geologic and geographic conditions within the Lake George watershed to say, all right, this is what these people have experienced. What are we looking at within our own watershed? And I'm going to take you through each of those very quickly. First being literature review. This document has been on our website for over a year, October 1st, produced by Chazen companies like Sean and Chris, working with their internal staff. And the whole idea was, what is the best science that's out there that's most relevant to the topics that we're talking about? And this information exists on our website. It has been there for over a year for anybody to take a look at and make their own review and position on this topic. So whether it's USGS or something else in your magazine, talking about specifically looking at septic systems, those ground conditions, and then ultimately how that affected that water body. That's what we're focused on. And we've made a point every single time of saying we have no preconceived notion of an outcome for this. Is the commission moving in a certain direction on a regulatory path? Could it be an inspection program? Could it be new standards? Everything was wide open. And the people that we brought in, we made abundantly clear that is the game plan. There is no, we know what the goalpost is and sell us to get to the goalpost. That was never part of the program. Anybody on our committee will tell you that. Number 2, other septic inspection programs. We contacted every single septic inspection program coordinator in New York State that we could find, even a couple out of state, and went through that whole schedule. How did you start your program? Why did you start your program? What did you find? What were your failure rates? How would you run it if you were going to do it today? All this stuff. And we turned it into, well, this is who we had, Canandaigua, Western Finger Lakes, all these ones with stars out here, essentially the lakes that we talked to, we got moving on. And we turned it into basically a data. And I said, if you want to know about these programs, you want to know what's happening in Cuba Lake or Cuba County, they do accounting wide. There's the program, there's their cost. Here we're looking at Canandaigua Lake. Here's how they run it. There's their program, there's their cost. This is also on our website. Just trying to get a feel for, again, how it's administered, what those costs are, and what their outcomes are, which is critically important to learn about. So this is on our website as well. And then lastly, we needed to find out, and most importantly, what are the conditions here in the Lake George watershed? What are we looking at that we need to understand whether we think this is going to be a problem for us or not, since we're not doing our own science, in the ground science studies that are taking years to validate. We know what's out there, we know what the science is. What are we looking at here? So one of our staff, Jason Kikinos, who's out right now, spent weeks on geographic information system data analysis and pulled in every layer possible from GIS to find out what do we know about our watershed. And this really kind of follows Dan Baruch and Chris Kavitsky's model when they were working on the Diamond Point area project. And I think EPA came up with the model, if I think wrong. But the idea is you have all these different limiting layers. This is actually steep slopes within Lake George watershed. We have a pretty steep Lake George watershed. What happens when you combine steep slopes and shallow depth of water, and shallow depth of bedrock, and a lack of forested condition, and non-calcareous soils, and all these various things? What happens when you start to add these limiting factors in? Every time you add a new limiting factor in, your effectiveness of your septic system goes down. So after a considerable amount of work, all these data sets were brought in, and then they're analyzed. And here's the idea, right? The darker red it is, the more limiting factors that each of these parcels has, and it was done on a parcel by parcel basis, really, within the Lake George watershed, particularly when within a certain geographic proximity of Lake George and our streams around the lake. So if you have a property that's like a maroon color, that means it's a steep slope property that has very thin soils, it has problems with depth of bedrock, it's close to a wetland. Each property has all of these factors identified for it. And then we have this map essentially that says, yeah, a lot of these areas around Lake George, if they had very little problems, they'd be showing up in white and pink. We're seeing a lot of reds and darker reds out there, which means from an overall analysis perspective, we have some properties in the Lake George watershed, particularly near shore, that are more concerning than others. So what did we find out? Here's kind of the high point, the $30,000 findings from this analysis. So simple fact, about 70% of the parcels in the Lake George Park are on septic, 30% are on public sewer. The sewers that we have in the Lake George Park are the village of Lake George, it's on Bolton, it's on Hague, it's on Ticonderoga's plant is outside of the Lake George Park, but some effluent goes in there. And we have the Hewlett's small system, and I may be missing one or two, but those are the primary systems, but they still only handle 30% of the septic that goes into the Lake George Park. 45% of those systems are actually located within 500 feet of Lake George, which is designated as the critical environmental area to Lake George by all municipalities around Lake George and this Lake George Park Commission, and 100 feet of stream. So almost half of the systems are in relative close proximity to water bodies in the Lake George Park. 84% of the septic systems are located on parcels that have one or more limiting factors. That's what we just talked about, right? Whether it's shallow depth of bedrock, shallow water table, steep slope. So most of the properties in the park have at least one, if not more, of these factors that could impede the ability of these septic systems to work to their optimal ability. And interestingly enough, once you run through the demographics of the properties around Lake George, the average age of a house in the Lake George watershed is 50 years. So the lifespan, the design lifespan of a septic system is anywhere between 30 and 50 years. If you meet those three criteria, right? Design, construction, and maintenance. That's when you get those 30 to 50 years out of it. The average age is 50 years in Lake George watershed. What we don't know is how many of these properties have had their systems upgraded, right? So that's something that doesn't show up in a database. But still, this is an important number to take a look at. So we also have the benefit of validating some of what we've There are assumptions or the information that's been provided to us, and thanks to Supervisor Stroud and his town board, his excellent staff, they put in place a property transfer code in 2019, meaning that if you're transferring a property from one owner to another, or even internally within your own family, the town of Queensbury would come out and do an inspection of that property. And they have highly trained personnel. In fact, we're going out and training with them. And they have some very interesting results. Number one, and what I found really interesting about these results, when we asked Dave Hatton, who was running the program, he had recently retired. We said, Dave, are you getting a huge amount of kickback on this program? You know, are people upset? And he says, you know, honestly, it's been a bit of the opposite, because when we go out, most of the time what we're finding are these systems that simply need speed levelers in the distribution box, right? So a speed leveler in a distribution box is a way to level the water to spread it out along all of the leach lines, right? So you're paying all this money to put in a leach field. And if that distribution box is a little bit tilted and all the water is going into one line, you're going to short circuit your system and it's going to fail earlier than it was designed to. So for $7 worth of speed levelers, when Dave Hatton is doing an inspection, they're installed, and all of a sudden you're using your whole septic system, increasing its lifespan by 10 to 20 years. And so by the time they're leaving, they're like, you know, we would not have known about that short-term failure and just extended our system. That goes from baffles, septic tanks, and every other small issue that's out there. So that is the majority of what the town of Queensbury is finding. It's actually improvements if you can fix what's wrong with the system. And you can help improve that system's performance and functionality for a longer period of time. That's a win for everyone. The more challenging things are what they're finding. That comes up to about 17%, right? About 1 out of every 7 systems in the town of Queensbury that's been inspected has required more structural upgrade or replacement. More often than not, it tends to be an infiltration bed going from a failed system that was no longer leaching to something like a mountain system, or perhaps even enhanced treatment. So those are the ones that tend to cost more money, but they're also the ones that are shown in the field to be non-functioning, non-draining, and not only are they potentially causing water quality challenges, but they're also causing public health challenges. And since most of the properties in the watershed are on private well, that's concern to everybody. So that's what they're finding. This is all real data, real time, from people that know what they're doing. So we have all this information. We're learning as we go. We spend a lot of time in this, talking to a lot of people, and now we have to analyze it and make a decision. So my board of commissioners will decide how are we going to move forward on this, and that's based on not only what we found, but also public input with folks like you saying, have you thought about this? What about this? And is this important enough to do? And those questions are what we like to put out there all the time and say, is this important enough to do to protect Lake George at what we feel is a fairly reasonable cost, and a program that seems to be as efficient, if not more efficient, than every other program that we're looking at in New York State, because that's, I think, where we're going in this case. So after looking at all these things, spending many meetings, Ken, I don't know how many meetings we had, but quite a few, between our regular committee and our technical advisory committee that was specifically focused on the technical issues of this, they came forward and said, yeah, we think we want to advance a program that was looking at septic systems within the critical environmental area of Lake George, and we want to do it on a recurring basis of every 5 years, just like every other single inspection New York State does. It's a recurring 5-year program. And this decision has been supported by municipal elected boards around Lake George, which is very helpful to us because we work with them on a regular basis. So if we move forward with this program, and that decision has not been made yet, that decision is either likely going to be made at the chairman's discretion, either December or January at one of our meetings. But what would the program look like? So this is the lake-wide map of the resources of concern, the properties of concern, but how could the program work? So first, we can't do 2,700 systems in a year. It's impractical, and we don't need to. We have 2,700 properties within the inspection area of 500 feet from the shoreline and 100 feet from DEC regulated streams. If we have a 5-year rotated program, 1/5 of those properties will be inspected every year, worked out into about 540 properties per year. If we do 540 properties per year, estimating 2 inspections per day per inspector, we're looking at about 2 to 3 inspectors going out and inspecting these systems and making sure that they're as compliant as they can be. In a perfect world, all the numbers work out fantastically. We know that's not going to be the case. We've heard that's not going to be the case from other lakes, But that's the base model of how it's planning on working. So each year, in February, most likely, we're going to be sending out a letter to the first group of 540 landowners, and we're still working on a prioritization, exactly who we're going to be mailing out this first letters to. But we are going to divide them out geographically, so we're not overloading any individual municipality for the approvals process. So one thing that the commission is not doing is we're not doing anything past the inspection and reporting stage. If David Miller comes in and we see you have a failing system, we apologize, you're gonna need to upgrade your bed within 6 months. He says, all right, well, how do I do that? Am I working with you? We say, nope, we're providing this information to that municipal review authority. So whatever existing happens within those towns, whether it's a town review or whether it's a county review or a Department of Health review, that system doesn't change. So it's just like, okay, that's provided to the homeowner and to that oversight authority, and then they work together on that approval process, and the commission is out there. So it just eliminates us as another layer. And we talked about it with Dan Baruch and code enforcement officers around the park, and they said that efficiency is going to help everybody. No one needs to go through multiple processes, so that's going to be helpful as well. So what we're looking at is to make it as convenient as possible on homeowners. Is the homeowner would schedule the pump out. You schedule a pump out on your own time, and you give the commission a week, and we will have an inspector at that property. So we're not calling you and telling you 2 days from now, you need to have a hauler on that property, or you're going to be non-compliant. No, you have a year, but they're essentially 7 months. We'll write you a letter, say, contact your favorite septic hauler, you schedule that time, we will have a body on site to take a look at that, and then we'll provide your report afterwards, which we found, I think, is going to be very helpful to folks. This is important, the septic hauler to have the septic tank and distribution box uncovered. The septic tank is generally easier to find. Distribution tank is a little bit harder to find. This is one of those X factors in the program. Sometimes we're not going to be sure how long it takes to find a distribution box because most people don't have them marked. But again, that's a little bit down in the weeds, but it's an important process for us to control, because that's how you find any actual issues with the implementation. So LGP inspector will be on site for the pump out and to conduct the inspection. Our inspector needs to be there prior to that hauler pumping out the tank. If we show up and the hauler's already pumped out the tank, we cannot do the inspection that we need to do. We're going to be very clear with all the homeowners as we move forward on that. And then at the end, we're very open. They say, what did you find? It's not going to be, well, I'll get back to you and I'll tell you later. This is what we identified clearly on the inspection. The homeowners are going to be there, and they'll be with our inspector the whole time. And if there's a question of saying, well, I don't understand, there's water in my distribution box, and you're saying my leach field failed. How is that even possible? Then we'll work through that, how that actually works, and the fact that this is one of the key indicators of failed infiltration there. So our people are going to be there to work with people, educate them, and talk to them. If there's any contention, then we follow up after. What is the cost? The number one question that we seem to get on this, and it's fair enough. We wanted to schedule this project, or just put this whole program together in a way that wasn't financially burdensome to most property owners around Lake George. Running the math,
Talking about the inspection cost.
inspectors seasonal at average $20,000 an hour, running through the 6 or 7 month inspection season. That's going to cost us about $120,000. 2,700 properties in the system charge $50 per year, generates between $120,000 and $130,000 per year. This is not a moneymaker for the park commission. This is just not another graft of just sending money to another state agency. It's going to be money coming in and money going directly out to the 3 staff to staff this program. And at the end of the day, it should be fairly much in wash. We're not looking for contributions from municipalities, contributions from nonprofits. This is going to be simply an interaction between people that are in the program and your park commission working with you to try to make sure that your system's working. $50 for residential property owner. For rental property owners, are going to be charged a $100 fee because they're more complex, and we're going to need 2 inspectors at those sites just to make sure that we're covering all the bases on those properties. And the same vein, properties with holding tanks, we're only looking at a $25 fee because we're not looking through the distribution box. We're not looking at the leach field to find out if there might be any problems and challenges there. We're just looking at the holding tank and the alarms in that system. It's going to take less time. So we're looking at a lower fee for those folks. And every time we come out, once every 5 years, there is going to have to be a septic pump out fee. We consider this largely a wash. DEC, Department of Health, recommend cleaning out septic systems anywhere between 2 and 5 years, depending on uses of the system. We're on the high side of that with a 5-year program, so we're saying this should generally be happening in the first place. You should be maintaining your system by pumping it out at least 5 years. So we don't consider that an additional cost from the program. We're hoping that people are doing that anyway, because that's just good business. What if issues are found? This is our number 2 question. If you have failed systems and components, those need to be corrected within the 6 months. Most of what the town of Queensbury has been finding and what we've talked to with other lakes are simple fixes, right? The town of Queensbury, 65% of challenges that they found are a broken baffle on a septic tank or speed levelers being off or a cracked distribution box. All those things can be fixed, if not right there on site, then the next day when that hauler comes back with the materials he needs to fix those things. And those are the fixes that will increase the quality and the lifespan of the system and are a benefit to those homeowners. Consequently, even if you have a failed infiltration bed and you need to put it in one of these, there's still a 6 month time frame, but that is going to be expandable based on need. If you can't find an engineer, because that needs to be designed by an engineer, if you can't find an engineer and you can't find a contractor, you simply say, here's my best efforts, I tried what I did, I can't get these guys to do it until next year. We'll say, you did your best, let's make sure you get it on the ground. So there's going to be a reasonable discussion between, at that point, it's going to be the property owner and the people at Dan Bruce that are going to be doing the property reviews. This is not meant to be a burdensome, let's find all the problems and point a finger and say, we got you on this. It's let's fix what we can in a reasonable time frame and make it happen. So again, as I mentioned, the reviews are all going to be done by the locals, whether it's towns or the county itself. There are septic replacement funds. We happen to have our window and the DEC windows have come together fairly well. The state of New York, a couple of years ago, started putting money into lakefront water properties to say, if you're looking to upgrade your system and fix your system, if the homeowner pays for that upgrade, the state of New York, if you qualify, will pay up to $10,000 of that cost. Now, that program is only eligible for up to 250 feet from the shore of the qualified lakes. Lake George is a qualified lake. Remember, I got a call this morning from the gentleman, Mr. Wilcox, and he said, well, I'm 370 feet out, so I'm in your program, but I'm not eligible for the New York State reimbursement. Is that correct? And I said, unfortunately, that is correct. That's just where we are. Follow-up conversations, why can't you guys work better together? That's another fair question. But they're 2 completely disparate and separate programs. We see this program as a real benefit to people on Lake George. Hopefully it's something else. Ethan Gaddy manages the Warren County program. I believe $595,000 we discounted this year's program, and they've been subscribed to that amount. With the allocation of those funds and with the utility of those funds, the state of New York is saying Lake George gets things done. Essex County allocated the money. Warren County has allocated the money, and I think Washington County is working on it right now. With that kind of a success, the state of New York is willing to put more money in from more funding and from what I'm understanding. And again, we have to remember, this is more of a capital project, and the state of New York continuing to put this in. If we're fixing as many septic as we think we may have to, at some point, they'll be done, and then they can move on to another water park. So we think we have a pretty big case to be made to continue allocating money to Lake George, which we think will be helpful. So that's part 1 of the program, and that's the more detailed, complicated one. Part 2 is new septic system design standards nationwide. This is kind of a much smaller part of the program. The Department of Health in New York State is the one that regulates residential septic system design. Part 75A, you can look it up on your phones. Those are the design standards that you need to meet to put a septic system in New York State. There's a couple of those design standards that are traditionally meant to deal with water quality, right? They're meant more for public health. If you ask a public health representative, they say, what were the design standards of a 2-foot separation distance made for? Was it water quality or was it public health? They said water quality was a distant fourth in our calculations. It's all public health. And so in talking to the best scientists in the world, Joe did weeks worth of research, and we said, if you could do 1 or 2 things better for design standards to protect water quality, what would you do? And every single one of them came back and said, increase your absorption area from 2 feet to 3 feet, because the soil does 99% of the work, and and cleaning up the pollutants between the bottom of your filtration line and the bedrock of the water table. And so there's one top gentleman, Joe, I can't think of his name, up in Montreal. Which is, that is exactly what you need to do. If you want to get that extra gain, that's where you're going to get it. And that is a low hanging fruit and something that is not too difficult to do for folks. We're not asking for an enhanced treatment unit for $30,000. I'm saying another foot of soil is a better way to go when you can do it. So we have things that we look at that really seem reasonable. So all new systems in Lake George, if our regulations pass, are going to be looking for not just 2 feet of usable soil, but an extra foot. And we've concurred that with pretty much everyone that we're talking about. Variances from waterfront horizontal setbacks and vertical separation distance require improved water quality performance. So if somebody needs a variance to put a septic in on a small lot, we're asking that homeowner to do a little bit better and 1 or 2 ways with whatever that system might be, whether it's an enhanced treatment unit, whether it's adding extra depth to their infiltration bed, whatever that is. We're not really driving it, but that'll be up to that approving authority to say, all right, you need a variance, you need to do a little bit better. And those design engineers will be on board to say, here's how we can cost effectively make sure these septic systems, since you need a variance from a setback, are functioning as well as they can. So we're looking at that. And then redevelopment of any property requires upgrade to current standards. So if you've been around Lake George region, or really any region for a while, you see tear down rebuilds, right? Tear it down to the ground and they go right back up. And in many cases, there hasn't been a requirement that that house that was a 2-bed, 1 bath and now went vertically because it didn't expand the footprint, is now a 4-bed, 2 bath. They hadn't been required to upgrade their septic system. And that just doesn't make a lot of sense. So the whole idea is if you're redeveloping that property and changing what that house was to the different standards, because all houses are rated on the number of bedrooms. If you're changing that standard, you need to bring that system up to those current standards. So those are the 3 fairly straightforward things that we're looking at from a design perspective. Again, we have been trying to get the word out as much as possible. This is 3 simple examples of outreach. I have dozens of these on my computer at home, whether it's the Mirror, the Iraq Explorer, Post-Star, NCPR just did the article last night, showed up in the newspaper about this topic. We want people to know about it, understand it, and ask questions. Hopefully, we'd like them to agree with us that this is important to do. But if people disagree with us, that's fine too. But we just want to know the sentiment out there is. That's the reason for today. This information is on our website. You can scroll through it right now on your phone and you can find everything that I've talked about, all the studies, all the programs, all the science, all the math. It's all there on the website. What are our next steps? Well, we've been doing outreach to property owners. I don't know how many people are here today because of the 2,700 piece mailing we just sent out 2 weeks ago saying, hey, we're having this public hearing. We'd love to have your input. We have, I don't know how many people on Zoom, but we offer that because we know we're late, right? We're in November. We wanted to do this in August. We didn't have the authority to do it. So here we are. So we have the Zoom option. We're trying to get the word out as much as possible. Here's our public hearing today. Public comment period is open until the 30th of this month. And if it is approved by this board of commissioners, then we'll be looking at spring of 2023 as an implementation down there. So that is the 20+ minute overview of the program after literally many hundreds, if not thousands of hours worth of work on the program. So what I think the chairman would like to do is have our council kind of talk a little more detail about the process and then questions and comments. We're going to do our best to answer questions. If they're simple, straightforward, programmatic questions, if they're rhetorical, if they're more abstract, it's our requirement to take those thoughts, put together a response, and then within a couple of weeks, we're going to have a formal response document that's going to be on the website. We're going to outreach status. So I think that would be that, Mr. Chairman. I think we're going to do this.
Thank you. You don't have any large displays, do you, Carl?
Oh, no, I'm not that fancy.
I'll return to mine. Dave mentioned the hours that were put in, and I like to think I worked hard all of my life and applied for my family, and we get a paycheck every once in a while. My wife asked me about 2/3 of the way through the project as to where the paycheck was coming from, and I was putting in more hours here than I could put in. When I have partners, don't tell them. Carla, please. legal advice.
Sure, Mr. Chairman, not a problem. Like Dave said, there's a specific process in the state of New York that you have to go through if you're going to create a regulation. The State Administrative Procedure Act, it's this nice dry act that really only lawyers read, not for fun, but it's a process. So what you have to do first, as Dave had indicated, is once you get all the information together, then what you do is you draft your regulations. Talking to all of the DC, DOH, in this case, municipalities. So that was discussed. Back in, you also have to conduct SEQR, State Environmental Quality Review Act. This board did that. This board declared lead agency and just went out to all the different agencies and said, hey, do you guys mind if we're the ones that are the lead agency to conduct the environmental review of these regulations? Everyone said, yep, you're the right agency to do it. So this board did conduct their environmental review, and at a commission meeting, they did approve it and issued a negative declaration under SEQR. The process is, then we publish that in the environmental notice bulletin, and that, like stage one, I like to call it, was complete. The regulations were then drafted, redrafted, revised again and again and again and again, with Sean, who was unbelievable with the technical aspect of it, because that was not my part. And then went to DC, worked with their council, worked with DOH's council, ultimately got the regulations ready to go, sent them down to Albany. Down to Albany. The governor's office has to review all of the documents. So we work with legal counsel down, Department of State, Office of Budget, and the governor's office, the executive chamber. Work through some documents with them. On the website, you do have specific documents that staff also had to prepare. There are different regulatory summary statements on there. There's the text of the regulations, then there's a summary of the text of the regulations. And then there's different documents on there, a job impact statement. Well, what jobs are going to be created and how does this impact them? And then there are different analysis, a regulatory impact statement. That's on there. So there's a whole host of documents that staff put together that are out there that are reviewed by the governor's office. And that review, as Dave said, that review, we have no control over the timing, and it takes a long time, which is why we're here now. Once we finally got the approval from Albany saying, you're good to go, at that point, we were allowed to release the regulations to the public. They were done, we could not release them to Albany. I know a lot of folks are like, let me see your language, can I see it? That's not up to us. The law says not until the governor's office says so. We published in the state register, we sent it out. That was back on September 7th. You then have 60 days to review everything, to present comments. I know Dave got some comments, emailed to him, through the Park Commission, and we could not hold this hearing until after 60 days. So that's another 2 months of, here, look at this, review it, ask us questions, give us comments during that time. And then we come to today. We're required by the Procedure Act to have this public hearing to hear from you. And that's the point. The point is not for the commissioners to sit here and tell you what they think. The point is for the commissioners to sit back and to listen to you and to have you tell us, hey, I read the regulations, these are great. That's what we really want to hear. Or, hey, I read the regulations, what did you mean by this one section? And as Dave indicated, we'll try and answer those questions best we can. After today, we're still leaving the public comment period open. We're leaving it open even further than we have to. Usually it's only 5 days from today. The commission's leaving it open 8 days from today. So you can still submit further comments after today. Maybe you've learned something today, or you'll learn something before you leave. And then you leave and you're home and you're eating dinner and you're like, oh, I forgot to ask that. Dear Dave, I forgot to ask this. And you do that. At that, once that period is closed, then we have to put together a formal response document. And for those of you that have seen what we did with the stream corridor and the storm water regulations in the past, it is a written document. It is, these are the questions and comments that were presented. This is the answer that we've given. And all that will be out on the website as well. The next step at that point is for the commission to make a determination. And again, that is when the chairman decides that will happen. It may be at the December meeting, it may be at the January meeting. At that meeting, this board will determine whether or not the regulations will be adopted. If they're adopted, we then have, they're still not ready to go. We then have to submit them to the state register. The state register waits 2 weeks, then they publish them, and then they become effective. So they would not even become effective until January, February at the earliest, and then implemented when staff moves them forward. In the event that for some reason there are substantive material changes to the regulation, the whole process starts all over. When I say the whole process, I mean soup to nuts, the whole process. We rewrite, we have to rewrite them, we have to go back through everything. We do seeker, we go down to Albany, the whole process starts again, and then there's another public hearing. If there's typos that you folks picked up because I just don't know how to type, if there are little things that aren't substantive, like let's move this section to here and this section up to here, that doesn't require us to start the process over again. But at the end of the day, that's generally what's going to happen. So I think I know that was a lot to throw out at you, but that is the regulatory process here in New York. I'm good. Yes.
We're good. There's about 50 people here. I'm assuming there's some duels. Most of you want to be heard, would like to be heard. We want to hear from you. We do have some people out in it's called La La Land. That's not correct.
Cyberspace.
And so I'm going to ask you to, when you approach the mic to speak, please give your name, and I don't need your address. Kind of Smith Street, but tell us where you're from, Silverdale or East Side or South New York or East New York, things like that, just so that for the record, we have a process. Matt, he's ashamed to say, gee, the third guy before me said the same thing I was going to say. Just say that. He's already said it. Thanks a lot. I'm glad to be here. And we'll all leave here with our skins tonight. I don't know how to do it. You're not all, we should have sat down alphabetically when you finished. So why don't we start with the front row over this corner and work our way, and don't be afraid to tell me if I'm jumped by somebody or whatever. I'm prone to making many mistakes in my life. You want to be number one, sir?
No, sir.
You pass. How about you folks? You're good. You're good.
I'm speaking.
You're speaking.
Yeah.
Break it in. We have a mic right there.
All right,
Be on the 7 o'clock news tonight.
and yes,
Be careful when you touch the mic. There's a camera there for the Zoom,
okay,
so we don't want your pinky.
all right, no problem. Ken, nice to meet you beyond Zoom.
You
Yes,
know, I was joking about that earlier today. I said to someone, I said, you know, I need to carry around a picture frame, empty picture frame, so I can put it up in front of you. Oh, I know where you are. Yeah, you don't have pajamas on today, so that's good.
my name is David Miller. I'm the Clean Water Program Coordinator for the Adirondack Council. I live in southern Saratoga County, work remotely for them, and work on clean water issues throughout the Adirondack Park. On behalf of the Adirondack Council, I speak today in support of the proposed Lake George Commission proposed regulations to establish a septic inspection program. We provided David with a comprehensive review of it and comments from our Executive Director, Willie Janeway, and we stand in solidarity with you to move this program forward and help educate all on the importance of it. I do also want to thank the Commission's Advisory Committee and thank the Commission for allowing me as a not official member to participate in every one of the meetings and provide input where I could and from my expertise. The programs that you put together are a model program that we can all be proud of and moving forward. And I want to say that in the aspect that in 2021, we authored a white paper on all septic system pollution issues in the Adirondack Park. And one of the first vital steps to any addressing these issues is a robust septic inspection program. And you're taking that step today. I'm not going to, at Mr. Chairman's request, repeat what Dave has said. that are in my prepared remarks on the harmful algae blooms, on the impact of septic pollution, on the 500 feet, or all the other parameters of it that you discussed today. But I want to say they're all model programs to move forward. And I think an important element of this is not only your implementation here, but how can you help lead and educate others in the Adirondack Park and other communities that have similar issues to move forward with similar programs. They're few and far between across the Adirondack Park, robust septic inspection programs, and your leadership and help could help guide those activities elsewhere. And for those that say, why do we have to do this? I look at it as a utility. Your septic system is your utility. It's like your power lines, just like any other utility within your system. And your utility is your homeowner's responsibility to maintain with the service that you're providing. I know this firsthand because I live in New Hampshire and my father-in-law built a house on Sunrise Lake in 1969, which then my daughter at 14 said when he was going to sell it, well, Dad, you're not going to buy it from Grandpa? And I said, I don't know if I can. She said, well, and you obviously don't want any place for your grandkids to visit. That was a 14-year-old. So we were able to make that work, and it's in our family. But our septic system found out this year, 53 years old, and it finally failed. And I'm going through that process right now because of the root systems in the field and other things that are going on. I don't have a replacement program, but I'm fully committed to make it up to grade now. And the codes now that I have to make it up to are not the same codes as 1969. So it will be a considerable expense, but it is my responsibility to do that. And for New Yorkers, you have the benefit of the New York State Septic Replacement Program, and Lake George is an eligible body. And we're working with Warren County, Essex County, and others to increase those numbers. Been working with Claudia, Anna Reynolds up in Essex, and others to keep pushing DEC to up the numbers of those available funds for the septic replacement program. So while it's $595,000 in Essex and Warren County this year, we hope next year your need's going to show the need to double that amount so more eligible homeowners can get there. So let me just conclude by saying the work you've done has been remarkable, and it was collaborative and has brought all the players together, whether business, environmental, community, local government. And we must act now and build on your successes. And I want to thank you for your leadership, foresight, and perseverance in moving this program forward. And we hope to work with you and help you in any way possible. And it's not just the council and its board and its staff. We had over 400 members send in letters of support for this program, because they know the importance of the work that you do. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Start with row number 2 on the end. If you're good. Next, please.
My name is Dave Wilcox. I'm a year-round resident on Assembly Point, and I had a number of questions, some of which got answered. But first, I'd like to say that, my observation of some of the homes around my neighborhood, they probably still have a 55-gallon drum and a cesspool, and because they haven't sold and they haven't had any building, it's still there. So this process will catch those. However, I do have some concerns about the implementation. First of all, I have a question. Can I ask them and get an answer? It may tailor my comment. How is the 500-foot selected? The answer I got earlier was it's a one-size-fits-all. I called DEC and their 250-foot situation statewide. Can you explain how Lake George became 500 feet?
Oh, sure. I know we spoke on the phone earlier. Maybe I'll throw this one to Joe about the critical environmental areas around Lake George, and then perhaps even Dan can chime in from his Yeah, so in our regulation, there's a critical environmental area that's 500 feet from the lake, and also extends to stream corridors. So it's an area that we're supposed to be protective of. Also, when we looked at, or Dave showed you the maps, when we looked at the different soils and those limiting factors, they got worse as we got close to the lake. So they're more difficult to build a compliant system in those areas. And lastly, if you have a failure in one of those areas, that close proximity to the lake, obviously it's going to potentially be more problematic than, if you're up on the highway.
So some total maximum daily load tests were done to determine that 500 feet is the appropriate, or what level of science was actually done to determine that?
It was more so geographic analysis, so.
Okay.
Yeah, the parcel sizes, the density of systems, or literature from the EPA that talks about, the density of systems per square mile. And overall, that can have a positive or negative water quality impact, depending on how dense or not. And so as they pointed out, almost 50% of our systems are in that, close area, which exceeds, optimal circumstances and can impact water quality.
And what research was done to determine that 5 years is the appropriate period? I have other thoughts about this. Got to empty your septic tank every 2 or 3 years. It sounds like that's a one size fits all, which applies sometimes, but not at other times. And how are we picking and choosing what items do apply, to everybody with one size fits all versus being rational? We've got oodles and oodles of reams of data. Why can't we apply some of that data to determining where's the bang for the buck going to come? Somebody just redid their system 10 years ago, and it's an engineered system compared to my neighbor with the 55-gallon drum. Why is it one size fits all?
Yeah, I think your first question was, how was 5 years arrived at? And I think the answer to that question is a matter of practicality. The commission can only so many inspections in a given period of time, and so many to do 5 years seem like a reasonable amount to get done with the proposed.
Why not 7 or 8 years? That was my point, as opposed to making it shorter. Why not longer?
Yeah, well, I think there's also some matter of urgency, right? So there is this regulation that is obviously going to improve or protect water quality. And 5 years was that happy medium of practical ability to get the inspections done in the period and not waiting longer than necessary with the appropriate amount of staff.
If I may jump on that,
Yeah.
Dave pointed out, this is, kind of like a car needs an oil change. A septic system needs the solids removed from the tank. Because if the solids aren't removed from the tank, they move to the field and the field blinds and the whole thing backs up. So this ensures, DOH recommends 3 to 5 years. We took the 5 years, the high end of that, to make sure that these systems are maintained as they should.
I would hope that, given the results that I've heard reported about some of the other lakes, that the first 5 years that you caught all sorts of things. Then the next 5 years, you weren't catching much of anything. Maybe we should look at, and I would hope that we would incorporate into the procedure a requirement that an evaluation be done of the results to determine whether 5 years is really real. Do we need to continue doing it every 5 years just to keep those 3 guys, employed for the summer?
Yeah, Mr. Wilcox, I know we talked about that a little bit, and I think that's an important point. So the responsibility of any state agency is to evaluate the efficacy of any regulatory program that puts in place. And this gives us an immediate ability to after 5 years and say, hey, this is what we found. It's probably, as you and I spoke, going to be, it won't be as bad as Otsego Lake, but it'll probably be something that is still pretty substantive. Every lake that we talked to said the first 5 years is going to be difficult. You're going to find a lot of failures. And then the second 5 years, you're going to find less so. And then after that, and we've seen that, right? Go through all the way around. I think there's value in what you and I talked about, which is if we see the first 5 years and we find all these fixes, and then we find another 5 years, and that number is dropping dramatically, I think it's incumbent upon the commission to take a look at that and say, do we need to continue to do that? Because we can save staff resources, we can save private money and get it to something that will seem to be the test. So I think it's a valid one.
But my fear as a former bureaucrat is that that step that you talked about never happens. So if it's not included in the current regulation that says you got to do it, I don't expect to see it done. That's my, my life experience tells me that. Yeah.
We can't pre-assume an outcome of the thing.
No, we can require that an evaluation be done and have some metrics in the current regulation that says the commission has to go through, shall go through and evaluate. And if the commission sees X, Y, and Z, it shall reevaluate and re-implement. It needs a sunset.
And I can guarantee you that the commission does that. We heard from two programs this morning at our morning meeting. Lieutenant Joe Jones talked about the Marine Patrol. We evaluate that program weekly. Justin Luke talked about our 9th year of our inspection program. We do annual presentations on these, and every time we're working on these, they're being fine-tuned and worked on. So we share the same exact concern that you do. That if we're not meeting the moment, then we need to modify the program. And we're the most agile state agencies I have ever known, and I've known that for 30 years.
Intrusiveness. Based upon my experience with the town of Queensbury, it's exceedingly intrusive to having an inspector come wandering through your bedroom and go into your master bath to watch you flip the lever on the toilet. There needs to be an alternative. This is the only thing I'm ever aware of that someone can come trotting through your house without probable cause. And, I don't know this for a fact, but my understanding is that someone who had a Queensbury inspection done a few years ago, they went around and did their own flushing. And when I got stuck with it this last summer because we changed the deed, somebody accompanied me and watched me flip all the levers. And it felt really weird. So what is the plan for the commission?
Yep. So we had that exact question. John O'Brien currently runs the town of Queensbury program, and I sent him an email about 2 weeks ago to say, what is the value? What are you finding when you're going in? How many of your systems are disconnected from the septic? Are you seeing a 1% non-compliance rate, 5%, or 10%? So John is going through his data and he's going to give us responses. And if he's showing an extremely high compliance rate with all of the fixtures are hooked to the septic, then I think it's this agency's contention that we will not be doing internal reviews of everybody's system, whether it's flushing. And we're still going to have some water running in the system so we can do the inspection, but it will save us time. It'll save capacity and intrusion if we're not doing so. So we're waiting for some of those numbers back from time.
I have a couple of concerns about the one size fits all when it comes to septic systems. We had an exchange a few weeks ago about the guy who uses his camp 10 weekends a year, and the sludge is only going to be about 2 inches thick. And my understanding, the main reason for pumping out the tank is to get the sludge down to the bottom third. There needs to be a mechanism that allows the homeowner to say, hey, I've only got 3 inches of sludge in the bottom of it. Give me a break here. I don't need to spend money having it pumped out. I was a good boy and I got my tank pumped out after 6 years. And the guy looked at it, he said, okay, but why are you even doing this? It doesn't need it. One size fits all is a real problem, especially with many of these properties that are seasonal. 30%, that's my last question topic. Why is 30% of the residences in this environment being ignored by this regulation? Why are not the municipal and private systems being inspected, or are they?
Municipal, are you talking about commercial systems?
No, I'm talking about Lake George. I'm talking about Hague. I'm talking about, Lake George sat there with a failed system for how many decades?
If you're talking about municipal plants, those are overseen by DEC on a regular basis. They have regular operating agreements and reporting timeframes. Those are beyond the ability or scope of this program because they're handled by another agency.
Is there any coordination? Because I see an awful lot of homeowners being subjected to a lot more than it appears that DEC does as far as enforcing any regulation, if I can believe the news about how long it took Lake George to stop polluting the lake.
challenge was like Georgia was they needed $27 million. And
So?
to the mayor's credit, he came up with it with a bunch of partners and did a very good job of that. So the goal of any agency is non-duplication, right? So it wasn't, we weren't going to step in on DEC and Department of Health turf and say, if you guys are doing this on a regular basis, we don't need to duplicate that effort. What is now being done is a regular review of residential systems. And that's what the commission thought we could get the best bang for our buck.
I guess my concern is, why are we spending all this money when we got 30% that are falling through the cracks based upon DEC's history?
You're talking about the wastewater volume, as I noted up in the slide.
You're 30% on the slide, yes.
Right, because they're overseen by another agency.
My point is that other agency isn't obviously doing its job if it took as long as it did to get that system taken care of. It would be nice if I could take 30 years to get my septic system fixed too and put off paying for it. If you multiply 2,700 by how much it's going to cost and take a look at the 30% and the 27 million, those numbers, I kind of think that there was a little much of a smoke screen in that environment. And I think that the park commission needs to have a little bit more input oversight on what else is going in the state. If in fact DEC is supposed to be doing it and they're not, and you're spending all of this time and effort and 30%'s falling through the cracks, it seems like a waste of money. Thank you.
Good point. Thank you very much. Appreciate your comments. And next in that row is right there. Thank you. Little technical.
Having a little bit of hard time for folks on Zoom hearing, so I'm going to point the microphone directly at. Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Can I bring this down a bit? No.
It'll pick up.
All right. I'm Beverly Posey and I live on the east shore of Assembly Point. And I'd like to applaud the committee for their hard work and diligence over time. I'm sure it's been a difficult process for everyone, and we've tried to keep up with the information you provided us with. I'll make this short. I'm personally gravely concerned about this and want the system to go forward because we live next door to a property that system is 80 years old. It was the property and the cottage was built in the 1940s. And 2 years ago, I saw a sinkhole alongside the building. That sinkhole turned out to be a cesspool. And the property owner did have it drained and put a riser on it, but it is within 6 inches of his building. And that's the location I know that is his bathroom. So in the springtime and every other heavy rain, we see a great deal of water coming off the area where his driveway is. It flows right down through that area, and you cannot go out there unless you have boots on. So again, it's a very important thing to us as a homeowner. I'm a full-time resident. We've been there since the 1950s, and we really are concerned about the quality of the water. We've had a filtration system for the last 22 years, and we've had the water tested, and we've also seen HABs in the area. So again, this is a very important program for the health and the safety. We have children, grandchildren who swim, boat, fish. And again, we want them to stay healthy, and this program will provide that opportunity. And I thank you all.
Thank you. You're the reason we're here tonight. Yes.
Good evening. My name is Lorraine Ruffing, and I live on Assembly Point. First, I'd like to thank the commissioners and the park staff for taking up this challenge. It has been the goal of the Assembly Point Water Quality Coalition to have lake-wide septic inspection system since we wrote to the governor in December 2020. Second, I have two suggestions for the implementation in the beginning of the 540 septic inspections. Our research has shown that the town of Queensberry does not have complete information on all waterfront residential septic systems, or even in some cases where they are. Priority should be given to the lakeside systems over 25 years old and to unknown systems. Priority should also be given to the areas where HABs have occurred, namely Bolton Bay, Basin Bay, and Harris Bay. And if you remember one of the slides that Dave showed us, if you looked on Assembly Point, you will see that most of the red and the pink areas were exactly where the HABs have occurred in 2020, 21, and 22. So we had them again this year. And as my sister just described to you, the condition of our next door neighbor, I would have to say that system is 50 feet from the lake, and it has to be influencing our water quality. So thank you again for your hard work.
Thank you.
Good evening. It's great to be here, and I want to thank all the commissioners for bringing this proposed regulations to where we are today. My name, of course, is Dr. Carol Collins. I'm a research scientist. I've worked on Lake George for over 40 years and lakes around the world. And I've been particularly interested in bringing these regulations to bear. So thank you all for all of your work. I also want to thank our governor, Kathy Hochul, and Commissioner Sagos for all of their work. And I'd also like to thank Mayor Blaze, Supervisor Strout, and the town supervisors all around the lake that signed the resolution propelling this action forward. Thank you. We're rapidly closing the window on opportunity to arrest the decline in Lake George water quality and the advent of harmful algal blooms. The adoption of robust wastewater regulations is critical in this complex process. In order to achieve and satisfy the purpose and desired outcome of these regulations, I would like to recommend the following two recommendations. I urge you to revise the definition of a substandard system to include absorption areas that are located less than 100 feet from Lake George, DEC regulated streams, and to specify wetlands. It's very important that we specify that rather than leaving it as a sort of like that means for wetlands. We need to specify that there because much more attention needs to be given to Lake George wetlands moving forward. The proposed 50-foot setback is the absolute minimum and wholly inadequate for the purpose of these regulations, which is to optimize the efficacy of systems to prevent degradation. The 50% represents the 50 feet represents a 50% of the scientifically accepted setback necessary for the physical, chemical, biological, and temporal processes necessary for phosphorus removal. We know that there's been an alarming 33% increase in orthophosphate in Lake George. Orthophosphate is the bioavailable form of phosphorus that's associated with human waste and stimulates harmful algal blooms. Orthophosphate, the scientifically acceptable separation of 100 feet would allow for absorption of phosphate, which is critical to the health and economic future of the lake. This is also important because the current definition would simultaneously allow substandard systems with a 50-foot setback and a 25% reduction in absorption field size. A combination that magnifies the mobilization of phosphorus to unpredictable levels. And it creates an unacceptable health risk to the lake and its community. Additionally, I would like to suggest that all inspections require surge testing. Dye testing is also useful, but I don't believe it should be used as a false negative. But it can be used as a, I guess, what I would call as a true positive. Second, it's imperative that DEC, DOH, and in partnership with the commission in assessing all intermediate size systems throughout the entire watershed to ensure that they are in compliance with New York State design standards and the commission regulations. As you know, intermediate size facilities require a DEC permit and can contribute discharges of 1,000 to 10,000 gallons of waste per day. In addition to the permitted facilities, there are numerous unpermitted facilities of the intermediate size in the watershed. In our advisory meetings last year, we learned that the speedy inspections of intermediate sized facilities is rare. This is unacceptable in Lake George and should be given the highest priority. DEC's speedy compliance and enforcement annual reports document the limited enforcement actions for Region 5. It also states that with limited resources, the department utilizes a risk-based strategy for oversight. It is clear that this strategy needs improvement. As regional offices can further refine oversight activities to reflect local factors such as ecologically sensitive water bodies, Region 5 ought to be given the resources it needs to protect the lake. An intermediate size facility can contribute up to 10 times more than an individual residential system. Given the magnitude and the attributable impairment, we need to include the entire watershed in that inspection. In summary, I encourage all state agencies and local municipalities to embrace these regulations in a comprehensive and unified manner. All too often, we compromise the purpose of our regulations and ultimately our resources with scientifically unsound allowances that result in lake pollution. I'd like to remind you that compromises can be made between people. The lake will always suffer the consequences of these compromises. In closing, I would like to thank the commissioners and my friends and colleagues who worked so hard on this for so long. And with these inclusion of these recommendations, I urge you to sign the proposed into law and wish you and your families a happy Thanksgiving. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you for your time. See, now we're jumping to row number 3. You're pleasant. You're good. You're good. It's your turn.
Hi, I'll be very short. I'm Ginger Henry Kunzel from Hague, and been listening to all the comments, and I agree that we should definitely urge you to adopt these regulations. We definitely need them. I have lived on a holding tank. I've lived on a sewer system. Hague is fortunate that our sewer system is actually pretty new. The first part of it went in the early 2000s, and the extension of it went in 2010. It's very highly regulated actually by DEC. I'm on the sewer committee of Hague, so we meet and hear about this. So some of the older systems, I think, like Lake George, probably definitely had some issues because they needed so much money to repair it, and it's hard to free up those millions of dollars. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't move forward with this program. So just because one part isn't working as well, we should hopefully get DEC and DOH to correct that, but it should not impact moving forward on the inspection of the private system. So happy Thanksgiving to all of you as well. And I know how much work went into this. So thank you to everybody that worked on it.
Thank you. Here's that. And here's that. Okay. I'm sorry. Jump right up. Don't let us leave without you.
Lisa Adamson, Assembly Point, the Assembly Point Water Quality Coalition. I changed my mind. I'm very much in favor of this program going forward. Thank you all for your hard work on it. And I just have a question. It sort of scared me when you said you might have to start all over again, soup to nuts. And I'm just wondering what kinds of considerations would cause you to review everything that you've done so much due diligence on? I mean, are they the recommendations that are coming in this comment period, or is it just something legal, unexpected? What could cause you and us to start over again, given the urgency of the situation?
Oh, I'm awake, I'm here. Substantive as in an entire section gets removed. Like an entire section, like the exemptions get taken out for some reason, because something comes up today and we find out we need to either add 10 more exemptions or take all of them out. Look, changing large portions like that based on information received in the comments or information received from you folks. It's not really a legal question, it's more substantive. Will the law change substantively so that it's a different law than what you have already had the chance to look at and comment on?
But
It doesn't normally happen.
How would you decide that? It's just discussion by the commissioners themselves saying this is a really good point. You know, we should rethink what we've come to.
Yes, Lisa, that's how it would work. Commission staff would look at it and the commission would look at it and say, look, you know what, Lisa was right. We need to change this. And unfortunately, that's a material aspect of the program. We got to start all over again.
Okay, thank
You
you.
have to find some more commissioners to do it.
Oh, that's good to hear. That's good to hear. Thank you.
There's time to hold, time to fold. How about the end of that row there? You're all set. Let's go to right back there, row number 1, 2, 3, 4. No, you're all set. I can't see all of you. I'll jump around here. Okay, there we go. Volunteer.
Hello, thank you for having the hearing. I'm Deborah Fishner. I am a part-time resident in Bolton. I'm part of an association. And I'm wondering if thought has been given about working with associations that might share a leach field like we do. And we are in the process of working with what's going on, but I would like to know if there are any parameters that you have. And also another question is the funding. It's really wonderful that there's funding. We are a community of 9 homes, and $10,000 maximum isn't really important enough to us when you consider the extreme cost for us to replace our system. So has there been any conversation, any thought about how to work with associations, how to encourage associations to make improvements?
Yeah, I can start and maybe Joe can chime in. They're very common around Lake George, whether it's Thunder Light or South Beach Association or any number of them in between. And we've talked to quite a few, and they're not synonymous. Arcady Bay is very different than South Beach, is I'm sure very different than your situation right there. Questions have come up on costs and fees and efficacy of pumping just one out and looking at the infiltration bed when it's a common bed. We're just looking at the tank. So that's a work in progress still. We can anticipate the first year we're going to be doing any associations. We want to get some experience under our belt and try to figure it out a little better. I think the hope is going to be, we've met with Jeff Rosena from South Beach repeatedly, just because he's very interested and engaged. And they pretty much run all on holding tanks. But he's interested in having a hauler come and do kind of a group rate. his experience is very different than our Bay, right? Which all have septic tanks and they all have pump systems that go up to common infiltration areas. We wouldn't have to inspect that infiltration area really more than once, but it'd be a complicated inspection. And then we'd be looking at everybody's individual tanks and pump systems around the south. So the long and short of it is, yes, it's a known commodity and there's no shortage of types of systems around Lake George that require that level of review. Since we don't anticipate having any of those associations in the first year of our inspections, we expect to learn more, gain more experience, and then we'll be looking in the future. Once we start doing those association inspections, we're also going to learn more. So it's one of our lesser concrete areas of the program right now, but we're hoping to move forward. So,
Yeah, I wouldn't add anything other than, there's gonna be obvious coordination and cooperation. The hope is with the HOA understanding our goals and, sharing those as far as water quality protection, that will, just get through. Obviously, we need to coordinate to see the common leach field and then perhaps work with the individual landowners to see tanks if those exist. But as Dave said, it's kind of a fluid situation where, it's gonna be a brand new program, hopefully. Learning as we go and certainly get through that commission association.
So I would assume as you work through those issues, you would inform either the homeowners, the association, so that we would know how to prepare for such an inspection?
the way I haven't talked to our board about this yet, but it seems if we have a general understanding of the associations in the park, I'm not gonna probably catch all of them. But just like we did with Jeff Rosna, if we want to better understand Arcady, we're gonna reach out to the leadership and say, can you bring in a few people, educate us about your system, and then talk about ideas to most efficiently do the inspections on these properties, because they know it better than everybody. And we'll be doing that with every association that we can find in 2023, and then probably start on the inspections in 2024.
And then getting back to the funding, which is nice to know that there's funding. Any conversations about how to accommodate associations?
Not that I've been aware of yet, no.
Is there anyone to speak to about that?
Well, each of the three counties administer the program themselves. Ethan Gaddy runs the Warren County program, so you're in Bolton, if you want to reach out to Ethan and let him know your situation. He knows a lot more about it than I do, but my understanding is the homeowner has to have some general understanding or knowledge or proof that their system is in need of replacement, and then you go on a list. And then the more you have, the better off you are. If you have Tom Hutchins just signed off and said, boy, I looked at this and here it is ready to go, that gets you on the list a little bit better than Dave Wick thinking, I should probably upgrade my system with no actual knowledge of it. But Ethan Gaddy is very easy to talk to, he's very approachable. He works in Warren County planning, you can get hold of it very easily.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Deb. Is continuing on her row, I can't see, can we jump to the blue hat in that row? No? Mr. Navitsky.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, commissioners. I'd like to thank the Park Commission.
You are home.
Oh, I got all flustered there. Sorry. Chris Navitsky, Lake George waterkeeper and resident of Sabbath Day Point. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for putting me in line. Commissioners, and thank you for the opportunity to provide public comment. Tried to be anonymous, but I couldn't. This is a very important issue that will have great long-term protection measures for the lake and for the water quality of Lake George. The Lake George Waterkeeper and the Lake George Association would like to first applaud the Lake George Park Commission for the process in preparing the regulations. The supporting GIS analytical analysis was critical to determine the influence of the important site characteristics that will have an impact on the efficiency of the treatment and the potential water quality impacts. We also thank you for the ad hoc and technical committees with the stakeholders from business members to elected officials, to code enforcement, to the engineering community. And they provided a wide degree of expertise and perspective. Commission's stated purpose for the regulation is to first ensure compliance with design and maintenance standards for wastewater treatment systems, provide consistent review of such systems, and optimize the efficacy of these systems to prevent the degradation of Lake George. We agree that the means to determine if systems are compliant with design and maintenance standards is to implement an inspection program, and we completely support this. And we strongly agree with the use of Lake George Park Commission staff. We feel that that is the best way to have that compliant system and oversight and consistent review. We agree that the consistent review of on-site wastewater treatment systems can be achieved through the more protective design standards in the basin as proposed and detailed by Director Wick, and we completely support this. We also agree about the need to optimize the efficacy of the treatment systems for the long-term protection of the lake. We feel to achieve this, we recommend that the definition of substandard wastewater treatment systems match the current Department of Health, the municipal shoreline setback standard for absorption areas of 100 feet instead of the proposed 50 feet. This is based on 4 factors: an age of systems, the soils present in the Lake George Basin, the influencing of the saturation of soils by the nutrients, and the history of maintenance in the basin. Quickly, the age of systems, these 100-foot regulations went in late 70s, during the 80s, as was said. So these systems are about 40 years old that are within that 100-foot setback that weren't designed to that. So they're at that end of their life expectancy. So those are systems of concern. The soils present in the Lake George Basin, we know that they're overburdened glacial tills and sandy outwash, very high hydrologic conductivity, meaning the water flows very fast, high permeability. We know that these plumes can enter the groundwater and move more rapidly to the lake. The factors influencing the saturation of soils by nutrients, these soils, and documented by Schuster's thesis done back in the 1990s, tend to be basic in nature, meaning that they're on the base side of the pH scale, not acidic. So they will tend to not retain the nutrients as well, release those, and there'll be a larger migration and influence to the lake. And finally, the history of maintenance in the basin. The study that was done for the town of Lake George showed that over 50% of the systems are not maintained, have never been pumped out, or people don't know where they are. So that clearly is a problem. So in conclusion, we commend the commission for this initiative to address one of the outstanding water quality concerns in the basin. It's well documented the proper system inspection and maintenance extends the system's functionality, protects the landowner's investment in the property, and protects the lake. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments.
Mr. Chairman, people like this was one of the letters that went out from the LGA saying we should be looking at that standard. We had a discussion both at the technical committee and in the overall forum, and we hadn't heard opposition until very recently. Joe was kind of our driver on this understanding, kind of the science of it, because it's an important topic, and I was hoping you might be able to provide a brief overview now and then a more expansive overview in the response document, but I think it'd be helpful for the audience and the people on Zoom to get a little bit of Joe's experience on this.
Sure. So the topic is substandard systems, recognizing that some systems might be functioning in the watershed, but might not necessarily meet the letter of the law that created regulations. The draft Warren County law, their definition of a substandard or failing system would be one that's less than 75% tank size, the septic tank, or less than 75 feet to the water body. When we looked at this, recognizing, as we mentioned earlier, that effective tank size can influence drain field function, right? If your tank's not pumped out regularly, if it's not the right size, you could export solids to the drain field that can back up and cause the system to fail. So our definition of substandard includes anything less than 100% of the required tank size per 75 inch. So there's no relief on that. It's important that it affects the functioning of the system. We also looked at the actual size of the absorption bed. This is something that's not in the Warren County law. We haven't necessarily seen in other programs. We require at least 75% the system to be sizable is 75% of what we're required at 75A. Again, these are called substandard systems, right? We're opening up, we're looking at them, they're functioning, they're not perfect, but they're pretty close, they're substantially compliant. And then we looked at distance. And when we look at the soils in the basin, they are predominantly non-calcareous soils, so low calcium, which when it comes to wastewater treatment is very good news, because these non-calcareous soils help the soils beneath the drain field to retain phosphorus. A publication by Robertson looked at long-term drain field function, and non-calcareous soils, such as we have throughout the basin, they retain soil largely right beneath the drain field, and there's not a plume larger than 1 to 4 meters. So we're not seeing, like you would maybe in other portions of the state, we're not seeing these large phosphorus plumes. We're not going to be, if we have a system that's functioning and sized appropriately, we shouldn't be seeing these large subsurface plumes. So the hope is by having this definition of substandard, which requires substantive compliance, and by looking at the actual functioning of the system and making sure, yes, this is all working as it should, it's not failing, we're having no short circuits, we shouldn't have to be reliant on that horizontal separation distance, right? If the system's working, you shouldn't need 100 feet of soil, because in these soils, again, the phosphorus simply doesn't move that far laterally through the soil. And so that was a large part of the thinking, behind this, again, to look at things that, might not be perfect, but are functioning. And again, these soils, we're very fortunate. It's nothing short of biogeochemical blessing that we have non-calcareous soils. I did speak with Chris recently. He indicated potentially due to Schuster, there could be more basic soils near the shoreline. I looked at that data, and I'd have to respectfully disagree. He didn't, say, the entire, rim of the lake is calcareous. And I did an extra exercise of looking at all the soils on the lakefront parcels with private on-site wastewater treatment systems, and found that 90% of the soils are still non-calcareous, even in that near lake system. So again, we're very fortunate to have the soils we do. It helps our systems function well. And that's the reason why we put the emphasis on things that would help system performance rather than on the horizontal setback.
No,
Is that helpful?
no. This is not a debate.
Okay, I was
It's
just,
not even a question and answer program. If you have more details, take it up with Joe on a personal basis, put it in writing to the fire commission, send it to me.
okay, thank you.
I appreciate your patience. Or stand up at the end. Next.
Thank you. I am Eric Sy, president of the LGA, the Lake George Association. And I'm really here to thank the commission, to applaud the work you've done, Dave. Tremendous presentation. And I'm impressed by all of the input we've heard here. And we have a truly engaged community of concern, committed to the future of this lake. And, when we work together, as we've demonstrated on stopping aquatic invasive species, as we're now doing to reduce road salt use basin-wide, we get it done, and we do create a model. People look to Lake George. They look to the commission. They look to the partnerships we've created here to help underwrite this work. And it's very heartening. So thank you all for what you've done on behalf of this priceless, irreplaceable resource. It's huge, huge. Reducing nutrients is probably the most important thing we can be doing now, certainly from wastewater, from stormwater runoff. I think that's job one at this point. And why is that? Nutrients are feeding algae growth. Dave mentioned it. We are experiencing now harmful algal blooms, the first ever in recent years. This is the canary in the coal mine. What do we do about it? We are still on the prevention side of the ledger. That's the way I see it. We have not gone over the other side like so many lakes. I mean, look at Chautauqua, lakes of the New York State HABs initiative, harmful algal bloom initiative. We're considered the best of the 12 in that initiative. We were picked because we hadn't had any HABs at that point. We now have HABs. So what are we going to do to stop it? This program is going to go a long way to reducing nutrients. We strongly support it. And we're already making serious strides on the municipal side. We have a new municipal treatment plant in the village of Lake George. Again, we did that together. We did it at all levels of government. We did it across sectors. We put our differences aside and we focused on what we had to do together to get it done. Same is happening in Bolton with the wood chip bioreactor, where we're applying innovation. We're doing things differently. We're trying new strategies to address age-old problems, and they're working. The wood chip bioreactor is delivering to the point where we are slated to put in we aren't, the Bolton is, 2 additional bioreactors probably next year at this point as far as construction goes. So there's a lot to be encouraged by. There's a lot to be encouraged by when we think of Queensbury and what they've done on their inspection program. Bolton has a program. Individual property owners, some of whom are here, who have gone ahead of their own initiative without rules or regulation, and they have stepped up and they have upgraded their systems, they've replaced systems. They're understanding the nature of the problem, they're understanding the gravity of the threat. And it's huge, it's important because again, we're in a position where we don't have to, we're at this sort of tipping point, right? And we don't have to tip this in the wrong direction because once we do, as so many other lakes are learning, you can't have it back. You can't have the lake that you lost back. It's not that simple. It's very complicated. So in closing, I just want to say that just as we do on invasive species prevention, just as we have on co-underwriting septic system replacements, we look forward to working with the communities, with the Lake George Park Commission on this critical issue, on getting it right, on being the model that we are on across the board on other issues, and continuing to show the way. And I can say without a doubt, I can't speak on behalf of the board, one of our members is, at least one of our members is here. I don't know who's online, but Ginger Kunzel. I'm certain that we will put our money where our mouths are, as we have on every issue, and provide some means, we're working through the details now, but of investing in this program, of investing in people's ability to participate in this program. Don't hold us to a number, but you can be sure we want to participate as partners. We want to invest in the success of this program, and we look forward to working with you. So thank you all very, very much.
Thanks for your comments. Are you waiting?
Yeah.
Turn is here.
Yes,
Yeah.
oh,
No, good.
yes, I am. Christine Bevilacqua. Thank you for all your work. I own 2 properties on Diamond Point Road, which was deemed 100 feet from a stream that runs up there. I didn't think it was 100 feet. I did ask this question. I was on a Zoom meeting and asked how it was determined that you were 100 feet. And basically the answer was, well, if you receive notification, you should assume you're 100 feet. Well, I actually went back and measured. The properties I own are greater than 100 feet because the stream doesn't go in a straight line. It sort of wiggles its way up the road. So the properties really are closer to 150 feet rather than 100 feet. So while I appreciate all of the work, I want to know whether I'm, just because I received, a postcard and a letter, if I still really am in that area because, and I measured from where the septic is, not the house, basically where the septic is. So that's basically my question.
Yeah, great question. And on those cases, we're probably not 100% right in our database. We did have one of Rhinos do 3 days worth of all the GIS to try to get as close as we could, but we have a process where if you received a letter and you think there's a dispute, then we'd come out and we'd figure it out together. And if you were If your system, which is the way the regulation reads, is not within 100 feet, then you are not involved in the program.
So what do I do next then?
So do me a favor and send me an email, give me a call at the office, and so we can confirm it both on GIS and on your property. And if we find out that you're not in the program, then you won't be hearing from us again.
Okay, just went out and took a tape measure, but just in case I know what the measurement was. The question I have is, I had just gotten the septics pumped as well. Not because of this, but because it was more than 3 years. What are you doing with people that, you just pump the septic and then you get a letter saying, we're inspecting because it's $400 to pump the septic.
That's the question of the night. You got an answer?
We do. We've been talking about that internally at the staff, and we're looking at a 3-year hiatus between when you got your system pumped before we would come back and ask you to pump it again. If you've had an inspection through Mr. Stroud's program and the Town of Bolton program, that's a 5-year hiatus from that inspection, because that would simply be the same program as we have right here. So if you had yours inspected through Queensbury or Bolton last year, we'd be looking at going an additional 4 years before we get you back in.
Okay.
So what we don't want people to do is overwhelm the pumpers right now and say, I can beat myself out of 3 years of an inspection if I go get this pump tomorrow. We're hoping that's not the case. Either way, they're gonna be back in the system at some point. But we're looking at a 3-year grace period. If you just had your system pumped, is if you have all of that pump out.
All right, well, thank you. Thank you for your work. I do appreciate it, but I don't think I've fallen in there. Thank you.
Always everywhere. Yes, sir.
Robert Niemer, Diamond Point, 45-year-round residence. I just came up here to applaud the folks that are sitting here for your courage to tackle an issue that's been talked about for my 45 years living on Lake George. I really appreciate all the time and effort you've done. I hope everything goes as planned. The only thing I ask, Dave Wick, is to continually monitor the accountability of this program as years go by, okay? And be ready to accept changes, modifications, or whatever. Because like anything else in life, you have to leave yourself open for changes that go on. But anyway, I'm sure you will. And thank you very much for your courage once again.
Thank you. Thank you for your time. Now, I think we're down to the back row, so why don't I pull up on the end? Stroud. First of the chosen. No, I'm not gonna discuss my Queensbury taxes with you. Tonight.
They're low. Well, Chairperson Ken Parker, Director Dave Wick, Commissioners, staff, I want to thank you. You're doing the right thing. Developing this program took a lot of courage. It took a lot of work, and it's worth it. And if you approve it, and I hope you do, this will be one giant leap for Lake George. Thank you.
And a formal thank you to the town of Queensbury for all the input that we got from your folks and the help. And following Mr. Stroud, yourself, want to identify back there? Tom, next. We're down to the end of the road. Any three of you there? Just. Are we done with the room? We're done with the room. Do we have people out in Neverland?
We do. Let's
You
see
know,
here. Yep, we've got 49 folks in Neverland, as you said. So I'm just going to go back through here, and there are some comments and questions, and those that are substantially different than ones that have already been asked, I will read aloud. So got a question here from B. I'm not sure where they're from. Said, is septic tank pump out fee going to be the same for pump outs needed on a private island?
we're not establishing the septic pump out fees themselves. That's established by the haulers. And I can't speak to what the costs are on the island. The cost, the rates that I got as examples were from land-based positions from Bolton South. So they're gonna be a bit variable. I don't know if anyone else can speak to the experience of pumping out on it. And we don't have that information.
And Michael Bonin says, can we consider a tiered inspection period for people that have recent inspections? I think you just sort of answered that question. For example, one every 2 or 3 years for systems that are 10 years old or newer, with increasing frequency as the system ages. So I think you've answered that. Let's see here. Next.
Anybody that wants to leave during this exciting part of the program, you will not embarrass yourselves. So you should have to go.
So David Crosby asked, how do we decide which homes are the first 1/5 to be targeted year 1 versus year 2? Is it based on the highest risk level?
It's a question, one of the most often asked questions as we're putting this together, both in the technical committee and the main committee. And so one of the main portions is we reached out to every code enforcement officer in the Lake George Park and said, are you able to handle X amount of inspections? Originally, the thought was, maybe we'll just do all of Queensbury first and then just go around. And that was a terrible idea because then we'd be overloading that town's review authorities. So the only thing that's been totally decided right now is that we're going to be dividing those 540 inspections geographically based on property around the Lake George Park. Secondary to that, we're not going to be doing association properties in the first year. It's been suggested we do all the lakefront first and then one row back and then one row back. There's some concern on that because other people are getting on board and they're not as well trained in the first year. And those first row properties may be more concerning and higher priority. We don't want to do all those in the first year when they're not as experienced as they would be a couple years later. So not a great answer, but we're almost looking at a random smattering of dividing those 540 geographically around the park to the best of our ability.
Okay. John McElhaney said, did the Park Commission seek funding from the legislature to execute the program?
For this program, we did not seek that. The only ability that the commission has to receive outside funding, at least in its 37-year history, is through the Environmental Protection Fund. The Environmental Protection Fund cannot be used to support state staffing. So that is 98% of the cost of this program. So we did not include that into this program. What we did request in this year's budget was $50,000 to purchase 2 vehicles and the extra equipment that we're going to need to supplement the hauler's equipment to help find distribution boxes and other things like that. But it's been made clear to us by them, and we're fully aware that the program from New York State cannot support staffing for the EPF, and we don't expect other switches.
Would you like me to read comments that are not questions?
Sure.
Okay.
Speed reading.
All right. Pamela Lester said the statement from Dave Wilcox, quote, the problem of one size fits all does not work. Her response to that is quite a few seasonal houses also rent their house out. Tenants do not treat the septic systems as their own, need to keep the one size fits all. Nancy says, I have a concern that regulations will change over time and systems that are repaired will fail again just due to regulation revisions. Is that something that you expect to happen or the regulations will change?
I'd have to have more information on that. I'm not sure. We'll respond to that formally.
Yeah, so we'll respond formally to that. Jay Frazier says the proposed program and associated regulations are well prepared and it seems logical to adopt and execute them. The responsibilities requested of the property owners are seen reasonable when considering the importance of the health and well-being of the lake and the surrounding communities. Support 100%, and he's from Pilot Knot. Stephen Gruber says the program does not allow any reduction allowance of the absorption field. This will have the direct impact of people not using ETUs that are the best septic replacement possible because they treat, not just reduce. The commission says that most treatment happens in the soil, but this is not true of many enhanced systems that can significantly reduce pollutants to rainwater quality before they go in the ground. Not allowing a reduction where they would clearly allow the use of an ETU is highly counterproductive and flies in the face of current science and goes against the trend in most other areas encouraging that are encouraging residents to switch to ETUs.
We'll respond to that.
Okay. Rosemary Pusatiri says she's commenting for the Lake Stewardship Group of Cleverdale Steering Committee. We agree that the waterkeeper is correct in requesting 100 feet separation between septic systems and the lake. We are certain that the waterkeeper has pursued this definition for substantially longer than the past few days. If this change can be made quickly without delaying septic rules becoming law, clearly the tweak should be made. It is worth it to make this effort to improve these septic rules. We are, however, opposed to anything that would delay the implementation of the septic regs. It has taken much thought, compromise, and effort to get the septic regs draft on the verge of becoming law. There are so many long overdue improvements incorporated in the septic draft as written. It would be disastrous to risk further delay. Catherine Clark says, why are you not allowing the 25% reduction on an ETU?
You want to take a crack at that with Sean?
Yeah, sure, I'll take it, and then you can engineer it correct me. So this is not allowed in the New York City watershed either. The reason being ETUs, although widely accepted as producing a higher quality effluent, is not necessarily removing phosphorus, which is the limiting nutrient for freshwater ecosystems and the nutrient of concern that we're really focused on. That happens, as we discussed earlier, in the soils beneath the drain field. So just because you have an ETU, which is excellent, you're improving the quality of the effluent, it's not necessarily significantly reducing the phosphorus, which is our focus. Our hope, kind of tying back to the previous comment, is if you're volunteering to do an ETU out of the goodness of your heart, that going, instead of 40 foot laterals, if you were hoping to get 4 30-foot laterals, I mean, the difference, the cost savings is going to be negligible when you have staff there. And we just don't think it's a realistic concern where if you're volunteering to do an ETU, you're probably not going to mind to put in the extra 10 feet of lateral. And again, with the focus being on phosphorus removal in the soil. Clean that up a little bit.
No, nothing to clean up. No.
HP user, so I'll have to circle back and get a name for this person. Says great presentation. I'm a seasonal resident in Gull Bay. If inspection reveals repairs are required, but setbacks will not allow leach field to be properly repaired, does New York State Septic Replacement Fund have monies to address the situation? How to find out what is not eligible for this program? I think you said earlier, contact the county for that information. Correct. And this is a continuation of that comment. I think a 100% holding tank is the solution. Does New York State Septic Replacement Fund have money for this situation? Probably respond to that one.
Yeah, I think they're asking if the septic program can take a septic system and change it out with a holding tank.
I think that's the question.
Have you heard anything?
I don't believe that's eligible activity. I think it's only limited to replacement with ETUs.
Okay.
But we'll respond formally.
Sure. And that is the end of the Neverland comments.
That's it. And first left the room.
You let this breathe, guys, stuff.
Well, I'm glad you're in third.
Can I ask a question?
I'm sorry.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Okay, so we've heard a couple of times
Now,
about.
this is a, nobody here has had dinner.
No, I think it's an easy answer. I just, so several people have talked about, the substandard and the distance from the lake. Is that, if that was changed, and Carla, maybe this is a question for you, is that substantive?
We'd have to think about it and look into it to see if it was substantive. I can't just give an answer right now. We'd have to talk about it. I don't know the science behind it, so I have no idea. I'll be completely frank with you.
Okay. Well, Chris, I didn't insult you, I hope I was rude to you. No. Because I didn't want this to become well, I have a rebuttal for you, Joe says a rebuttal for you. And this is a situation that if you folks feel strongly about this, you can produce all the information that you want, and submit it to us. We've got 8 more days to put it down, and we go from there. Anybody have any closing comments? Usually I have a commissioner who looks for an adjournment at this time, but I will declare this part of the hearing closed. We got 8 more days for comments. But other than that, call anytime. I mean, we are there. They even paved our road this past week, so we can drive and visit it.